Hi, everybody. I'm Kellye Garrett, and I have the privilege to interview our Toastmaster for this year, Byron. And Ellen, you had some stuff to tell them, right?
Yes, no, thank you. Thank you so much. This is like a dream of a lifetime. And a couple of little housekeeping things from my end, just so you know. I have my phone here because my husband and daughter are getting on a plane in LA to come here. So I'm very excited, but I'm also very nervous because I'm the travel agent in our family. So without me navigating and saying, hurry up, we're going to be late. It's rush hour in Los Angeles. I'm a little nervous. So I'm keeping the phone near me.
Do they know that you're going to be literally checking your phone
I
during
can't,
your
no, if I
Toastmaster?
check, I will literally have to take double the blood pressure medication. But I just have it in case of an emergency. If anyone calls or texts, it's here. The other thing is, I forgot to do this at my previous signing, and because this ends at 6, we won't do a signing, I think, after this. Everyone can go off to dinner, because then there's a movie tonight. I will be moderating a panel tomorrow, so I'll do a signing after that and a Kensington. The reason I'm bringing that up is that I put together a little giveaway for my newsletter. I'll pick someone who signs up for the newsletter and give it. And here because I am affectionately or less than affectionately known as the Queen of Swag.
She really is.
I really am. I had these, I'm going to be launching a new series in 2024, The Golden Motel Mysteries, where a burned out sitcom writer, who could that be? What? Ends up buying a motel at the at the bottom of Gold Rush Country and bordering a national park, and a character who we just see occasionally is Toki the bear, and this is Toki, so he's part of that. So I'm just saying that because I forgot to do it earlier. So I'm done housekeeping.
Okay, great. So I have my tablet. I'm not checking my phone. I'm looking at my questions. So as you guys know, Ellen is amazing. She and I have known each other for almost 10 years at this point.
I know.
We kind of started around the same time her first book came out the year before.
Yeah,
my first book. And so because you have so many series and you've had such an interesting career, I wanted to kind of just start from the beginning.
Yes.
So literally you're from New York.
Yes. Native New Yorker.
But you went to undergrad at Tulane.
Yes.
Which is in Louisiana. And how did you pick that school? Like, was it love at first sight?
Well, the interesting thing is that I knew I wanted to go. I hated high school. I was miserable. So I somehow managed to graduate. I graduated in 3 years with a less than stellar GPA. And it's funny because I said to my mom not that long ago, I said, I have a feeling, did you know I graduated high school in 3 years? And she was like, you graduated high school in 3 years?
You graduated high school, period?
Like my parents, everything was so chaotic, and I had 2 brothers. It was just so crazy that I don't think they ever knew, and I didn't even think to ask permission. I just did it. And one of the older classmates went to Tulane, and I just fell in love. I was a big Tennessee Williams fan. To me, like Glass Menagerie, which is actually set in St. Louis, where my husband, turns out, is from, is just, to me, it's poetry, for now the world is lit by lightning. I mean, that is just a beautiful line. And I wrote, one of the plays I wrote is called Asleep on the Wind, which comes from his play Orpheus Descending, where he talks about a bird that sleeps on the wind and never lights on earth but one time but to die. And if anyone saw the movie Elvis, suddenly Elvis started spouting. Then I'm like, he either read my play, which I doubt, or maybe he read Tennessee Williams. So, but anyway, they couldn't afford to send me right away. So I actually went to SUNY Binghamton, a state school in New York, for a year and a half. But I knew I wanted to go to Tulane because it was like the home of Tennessee Williams. And also it had the feeling, I kind of wanted to go to school in a 1940s musical. It just had that rah-rah. And the great advantage to it, it's like it felt like you weren't in a city, but it was in a city. And I'm a big historical architecture buff, and you literally can't, you can't look to your left or right without seeing some gorgeous piece of architecture in that city. So I just set my sights on getting there, and then I did. And I got, I worked to help out. I worked my way through college. I helped out. I didn't pay for my tuition, but I paid my living expenses, and so I just and it just stayed with me. And my parents, of course, were thrilled that I went there because it meant they could occasionally visit me.
Oh, nice.
And then we'd go tootling around Cajun country, and that's where I kind of fell in love with, particularly coastal Cajun. I always say, I really, if it's north of I-10, I don't know much about it because there's what they call coastal and prairie Cajun, and the coastal Cajun is like is south of I-10 and prairie is north of I-10 more. And prairie is more meat based. You know, it's like cattle and they do cattle and coastal is seafood based. And there you the more you know. I lied. I guess yesterday I would sing more.
So you have two series that are set in Louisiana.
Yes.
The Cajun country.
Right.
And also the vintage cookbook.
Yes.
So what do you think makes it such a ripe setting for cozies? Murder.
Well,
what do you think murder.
The thing that I really love, particularly about New Orleans, is you can create any kind of character, and they probably exist there. It's just you can like push the boundaries. And if I was thinking, you know, my parents had a cottage in Connecticut on a lake for years, Bantam Lake. Is there anyone from? What I love about that lake is that half the people who live in Connecticut never heard of it, but it's the largest natural lake in Connecticut. But I tried to create some of the same kind of characters, and it just felt like they didn't belong there. So, you know, and I think part of this, the city has to be resilient to survive. You have to have almost an ingrained sense of humor to survive in that city because it's just constantly, it's like the Venice of America. I mean, whether or not it survives over the next 50 years is questionable. And the thing that was really horrible.
Why do you say that?
Well, because it's so threatened by ecological and you know, and it's my friend who lives there and has grown up there. She says it's not it's not a third world city. It's a 2.5 world city. I mean, it has you know, the infrastructure is constantly crumbling because it's below sea level. I mean, there's a whole Instagram account called "Look at this FUCKIN apostrophe pothole or street." No, look at this street, and it's hilarious, but it's also like, you know, it's like potholes that are the size of sinkholes. And when I was there in October, someone had they put these cones to connote the terrible potholes, and someone had taped on it La Brea and an arrow pointing down. But they do, you know, you have to check that out because it's kind of funny, but that's like I always talk about humor as a survival mechanism. So, you know, just the characters of New Orleans and of Louisiana in general just really appeal to me. South Louisiana, I really don't know.
That was my next question, was that, like, what other aspects of your life influence your writing? Like people, situations, even elements of yourself. Like I know you also collect vintage cookbooks,
Yes.
like in the Vintage Cookbook series, which is your latest series.
Yes. Well, the Cajun countries were actually inspired by an overnight stay my husband had and I did in the late 90s at a plantation called Maidwood. And it was a no-host, and I hope I'm not boring people. I feel like I maybe talked about this before. But it was like a no-host stay. Like the people who owned this place lived in New Orleans, but they opened it up to guests. And so you were there with strangers, and so you're sitting there and there's a note like ring the bell if you want service, and you know, some of us are like, I feel very uncomfortable just ringing a bell to, you know, and then other people are like, no problem, and this guy from Texas was ringing away, and and I was like, but it was such a strange thing because you're sitting there having wine and cheese with complete strangers, making small talk at this like historic place that might or might not be haunted, and it was like if anything ever felt like, and then there were none. It was that stay.
So you're saying you killed people while you were there?
Yes, I was like, so it just stayed with me, and that really, you know, influenced me, and yeah, and the whole vintage cookbook, it's like that actually, the proposal was different, and they wanted me to change it a little because they kind of had books in the space that I was pitching, and so I started thinking, well, I collect vintage cookbooks, and then I kind of like started thinking about Ella Brennan, and the interesting thing about New Orleans is the three of the most famous restaurateurs are women, and they are Ella Brennan of the Brennan family, Ruth, I never can say her name, Fertile, of Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and Leah Chase, who's the only chef among them, of Dookie Chase. And by the way, does anyone here know why Ruth's Chris Steakhouse has that name? Okay, the reason yes. the reason it has a name is that Ruth Fertile was a divorced mother of two sons, and she was trying to figure out ways to pay for their education. So she bought this restaurant called Chris Steakhouse, and part of the deal was she had to keep the name Chris. That was she was contractually obligated to keep the name Chris. So she just put her own Ruth in front of it. So that's how it became. Because I always wondered, like, that's such a strange name. But research showed that's why it was named that.
You mentioned obviously the Cajun Country, and the first one was Plantation Shutters, which
Yes.
was a huge breakout. It was a Lefty and Agatha finalist.
Yes.
But it was not actually your first attempt to write a mystery, right?
No, my very, very first attempt was in 1999, actually, and I was pregnant, and that a writer I'd worked with on a series, and I'm not going to give too many details, it turned out I had a writing partner for not all of the TV I did, but most of it, and a writer we'd been on staff with, we found out had backstabbed us, and I wanted to kill him. And I couldn't do that, so I thought, well, I love reading mysteries. I'm going to try writing one. So I I used to teach at the UCLA Extension during hiatuses. I teach like improv storytelling or playwriting. And I got a free class, so I decided to use when I taught. So I decided to use that to take a mystery class. So I took this class and I wrote this chapter where I, made him this horrible villain. And then we read work in the class, and I was the only professional writer in the class, and everyone's was better than mine.
Oh.
Everyone. I was like, and part of like being a writer is to know when you're not writing well. Because if you don't accept when you're not writing well, you'll never write better. So, so I thought, well, I guess I can't write a mystery. But then, cut to 12 years later, my friends started a little writers group, and I was really going through with TV, there are you're high, you're low, you're high, you're low. And staffing season is basically a game of musical chairs. And sometimes you end up with a chair and sometimes you don't. And it was what we didn't end up with a chair that year. And I just wanted to do something else, so I thought I would try writing a mystery again. And I wrote something called, at the time it was called Reality Checked, and it won a William F. Deak Malice Domestic Grant. And that was my introduction to the mystery world. I'd never heard of Malice. I'd never heard of Left Coast. I'd never heard of BoucherCon. I knew nothing about it. I remember the elevator doors open. At the time, Malice was in the hotel where you went down to Middle Earth to get to the conference center. It was like, and so the doors open, and there were all these people who loved mysteries. It was like heaven. So, but the funny thing there was, well, anyway, I won't say it. But anyway, it was an amazing experience. That book didn't...
No, say it.
No.
No, say it.
Okay, so there were two winners of this grant, and so they introduced the other winners first. Were a husband and wife team who wrote, as Renee Patrick. They wrote this great series, historical series, and so they're introduced as the winners, and they say, and the woman introducing it says, and their protagonist is Edith Head, and everyone goes, ooh, and then she introduces me. And she says, and she wrote a fresh take, and there's like, golf claps. And I was like, and I told my husband afterwards, because like people were surrounding them and stuff, and I was like, hello, I don't know a single soul here. There are 500 complete strangers. And I told my husband afterwards, and he said, well, honey, you have to remember, you were with 500 people who remember who Edith Head is. So, so... And I was
just
like,
got it, sorry.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay. But one thing I will say is that there was someone who reached out to me, saw me wandering around after the banquet, and invited me to sit with them. And that person was Katrina McPherson.
Literally the nicest person in crime fiction.
And I've never forgotten that kind gesture. So, anyway.
You mentioned TV writing. So
Yes.
you and I are similar, where we have had various careers, but they've all been pretty much writing based.
Yeah.
So I know that you started off as an actor, but you also were a playwright as well.
Yes. I started off thought I wanted to be an actress, and I did a little of that, and then I started writing plays during. I became a union member, and I couldn't do non-union work, and I wasn't my competition at the time was short to medium height brunettes who happened to be Holly Hunter, Ellen Barkin, so they were getting all those roles and I wasn't. And so I started writing plays, and I started writing plays, and then I also started doing freelance writing and to support myself, and I ended up doing a lot of celebrity journalism. And I remember my first job was to interview Margot Kidder, and I flew out to LA, and I went to her house, which is like in the part of Malibu that's across from, PCH. It's not on it, and she's not there. And I'm like, oh my God, this is my first job, and I have to. And I'm like wandering around her house. I'm trying to like literally break in. I'm like jumping up to see windows, and then she finally kind of just floats into her driveway. And I guess she had hired someone. She's Canadian, but she had to like renew her green card or something, and she had hired someone to stand online for her down at the at the city hall, and then she finally had to go and call her number, but she never thought of letting me know. So I was like,
someone who hires someone to stand in line is not thinking about
no.
their
And what would be
interview.
great. And I once interviewed Shirley MacLaine, which was like the highlight. I love her, and she gave me two things that I will cherish to this day. One was she gave me brandy because I admitted to her I had cramps, because she said to me, "You look very pale. Are you okay?" And I said, "Well, I have cramps." And she said, "I'm going to give you some brandy," and she did. So, and the other thing is she gave me a mantra that I will share with you because it's proven to be so useful. And I was telling someone about this yesterday. I said, I'm scared of flying, but I have to go back and forth a lot between LA and New York. And she said, when you get on that plane, I want you to say to yourself, when you feel the fear coming up, I want you to say, I'm having a safe, uneventful journey. And I have that.
In the book.
It's in the book. It's, I've used that in books. It's in my little, in the little, what is it, the bio that my friend Lisa Matthews wrote up. And that's carried me through so much because I use it everywhere.
I like it.
I used it yesterday before I hopped on stage to open the night.
Did you use it before this?
No, I didn't. I wish I had.
No,
I'm a little nervous.
We're all friendly in here. So how did you get into TV writing then?
I actually remember the exact moment. I was, I don't know if any of you remember a theater company in New York called Circle Rep. It was an amazing theater company. Lanford Wilson started there. So many famous playwrights. And I had worked at Dramatists Guild, and so I knew all these famous playwrights like, Stephen Sondheim and John Guare and Lanford Wilson. And he helped me get a reading there of a play. And I remember I was getting notes from the guy, these pedantic notes on the play. And I remember thinking, if I'm going to be taking notes, someone should pay me to take them. And I decided to make the transition.
TV writing pays a lot of money.
Yes, it pays. You work for it, but it pays money. And the thing is, though, it meant it was so hard for me to say. It meant I had to relocate. I could not use the word move for years to LA. I relocated. And when I met the man who became my husband, Garrett, I said at one point, I'd never use the M word. He thought I meant marriage. And he was a little nervous because I thought, I really like her, but I guess I'll have to, think of how to handle it. So then I realized, I was using the M word for move. But yes, and I had to move. See, it's still hard for me to say that.
Say it one more time.
Move.
So I had a very short TV career, and I think it helped my novels in certain ways. Like I'm good with plot. Like I think I'm good with plot twists. Maybe other people don't. Yeah. And also with outlining.
Yes.
So I'm curious, like, how do you think your TV comedy career helped you with your books?
I did two things really helped me with TV. One was, of course, writing plays, although I was much more of a pantser with those than I ever was, because TV, or TV or film, an outline is, you can't move on to script until your outline is approved by various levels. With a TV show, it's the showrunner. It's, if you're working in network TV, then you have the studio and the network. If you're working in streamers, those two tend to be the same. But you have to get it approved before you move on to writing scripts. So I think it really helped me in that way. And then I did a lot of comedy improv, and that helped me in the room because you have to, talk about killing your darlings. You try fighting for anything in the room, you can be fired or not hired. I mean, there are times when I would, like especially a story point, if we were going way, way off. And one thing I really learned too was how to hear notes. And I learned that as a playwright too, because sometimes people give you notes that are basically how they would write what you're writing. And it can send you way, way off course. And, I remember going to some, we have table reads in for a script, and the executives would give a note, and some showrunners, like there were those who completely ignored the notes because they thought they were above them, and they were wrong. And then some would take them literally, and I'd be like, no, let's get to the essence of this note. Because if you do exactly what they're telling you and it doesn't work, they don't go, well, thanks for trying. No, you don't. You still end up, in trouble.
So how does that help with the books though?
With the books is I'm an outliner, and I outline very. I'll have like a 30-page single space outline. But what I've come to realize is my outline. Someone said this once when I was doing a presentation, that my outline is my first draft. And so that's why I created a workshop I sometimes do where I call it the organics of outlining, because I really feel like outlining is organic. It's just a different point in the process. And so, I will just sit there and I start with like a log line, which is really not a line. It's like a paragraph. And then I'll blow that out into a synopsis. And then I'll blow that out into a beat sheet, which is like the beats of what I want to accomplish. And then I blow that out into an outline. And that basically, then I write my first draft off of the outline. But I call it a fluid outline because in my catering hall series, the character of Terry Foco, who is the reporter, didn't exist in the outline. And I got to the draft and I was like, oh, she needs a nemesis. So I created that halfway through the draft. But still, the bones of it it really always stay the same for me.
Does it help with humor and dialogue?
Yes. I mean, I think everything kind of I've done has added something to what I'm doing now. Like dialogue, if you're acting, I mean, nothing tells you dialogue is bad like hearing it come out of an actor's mouth. Yeah, so I mean, even as a playwright, like as someone who spoke dialogue when I acted, as a playwright who would listen to people do my plays, and then you get to the table and you're with these professional actors, and some of the actors will surprise you. Like David Spade, when I worked on Just Shoot Me, David Spade, like his persona is this snarky guy. He's the nicest guy in the world. He's the lovely, self-effacing guy. And if a joke didn't work, he would come up to us and he would apologize for it. He would say, oh man, I've tried everything. I don't know what to do. And we're like, David, if you can't land that joke, it doesn't work. Yeah. So, again, that's where I developed that skill. And also the thing about when you're writing for TV, I mean, your people are paying you to produce a product. If you have to be there till 6 in the morning, you're there till 6 in the morning. And try being funny at 6 in the morning. I worked shows, there was one show I worked where we didn't have a day off for a month. And we get out at midnight, it's like, oh, what am I going to do all this free time?
On the flip side, how do you think it hurts you? Like, so for instance, I suck at not a description because you don't need it in screenplays.
Yes.
So like, is there any ways that you think that background you have to work harder in books?
And it's the same thing.
Yeah.
I hate writing what people are wearing. I can't, I don't know. It's like the hardest thing is describe in a clever way what people are wearing. Yeah. And I literally have one character change from one pair of jeans to another pair of jeans, because I was like, I never even wear jeans, but my characters do.
I hate like describing a room. I'm like, it's a couch. Like, there's a couch there. What do you expect, right?
I actually like that. Came from playwriting. Setting I love to do, and that's one of the things that I loved about being able to write books, and especially with the Cajun Country series, to create the evocative atmosphere. I mean, that I really enjoy doing. And finding the details, and also the details of place and how they affect a character. That's the other thing that I think ties it together for me.
So publishing is not the most stable way to make money, but neither is TV writing. So do you think because I think a lot of times people who are newbie authors, they kind of come in assuming they're going to be like Stephen King or something. So do you think, I know for me, like my background in TV helped me not have stars in my eyes when I published my first book. Did you have that similar situation?
Well, I think before, when the very first book went out, I didn't have that. I was like, okay, well, this is going to happen. Well, also getting an agent. I mean, I had a 20-year TV background, or 15 at that point, or whatever it was. And I'm like, I was like, okay, well, I'll get an agent. And it was really hard. It took me 9 months to get a literary agent. I had like a manager. I had, not people who did the business. And, it's like back to square one. And I think at first, with the first book, I kind of had stars in my eyes. But then when they went away, I was like, okay, it's not like, but I know TV writers who wrote one book, then they got that tiny little royalty check and they never wrote another. I know more than one.
It's not as lucrative.
It's like, then they went back to TV. It's like, oh. So
luckily for us now, you write books full time.
Thank you, Writers Guild and my pension.
And you have you 4 series, but you have 3 that are currently out. How do you balance writing different? Because you would have sometimes 2 books a year.
Yeah, and I think outline for me really helps that. I'll spend 2 weeks to a month creating a really strong outline, and then what I do now is I write. I do 10,000 words a week, but I write Monday through Friday because my husband once said to me, he said, since you've been writing mysteries, I see you more, but I talk to you less. Because I'd be like, don't talk to me now, I'm writing. So when I was like writing plays and I had roommates in New York, I made a little sign, am writing. So I put on my sign when I went out like to get coffee or I don't drink coffee, but get tea or soda or something. So my roommates would know not to talk to me, but I couldn't do that to Jer. Instead, I would just say, no. But it's, it's hard to live with that. And then I just schedule it and I make sure my whole writing career, my goal has been to always beat a deadline, because I don't like have it hanging over me. So even when I wrote magazine articles, it was like I always beat my deadlines. So
I don't have that problem. What I love about your books is the setting. I get a great sense of place. The New Yorker in me loves the catering because you mentioned like subways and like actual, like not just you took the subway, you're like, oh, she took the N, or you actually mention what subway she takes. Obviously, we talked about you in New Orleans and all that stuff. So like, why is that so important to you?
Setting? Why is it
Yeah,
so important?
setting.
I guess because I really enjoy, I feel like, our books are an escape. And if someone can feel like they're in the place when they're reading my books, it's just like the ultimate kind of escape. Like if you feel like you're on the subway and that is look, I'm a New Yorker. It's like, I know what it's like to be on a subway platform on a hot summer day. And then you come out and it's even hotter. In that particular series, Maria Dorico was my nonna's maiden name. My character lives where she lived. She lives in the building, the little 2-family house in Astoria. She works in the catering hall where we had our New York wedding reception. So I feel like if I can bring people into the world so they're reading the book and, I hear you've got a Louise Penny. Well, who doesn't want to go to Three Pines? I think that's part of the magic of what we do.
So what I loved about Bayou Book Thief, which is the new series and the one that's nominated for the Lefty, is the character of Ricky. She has such an interesting background where she's white, but she's been adopted by a black woman and a Mexican American man, and has like an interesting background with her, doesn't know her birth family because she's left at the hospital. So how did you come up with that character?
The actual character I read online, I read about a nurse who adopted a NICU baby who no one ever claimed. And I thought that was such a beautiful, touching story that it just stayed with me. And then I started just thinking about like the world, like so many, when I was in the hospital, having Eliza, I had preeclampsia. So I had to be there for like a week. And my main nurse was a fabulous black woman. So I thought, God, she'd be a great mom. And then I thought about, well, in LA, a lot of what they call below the line people are, they're Hispanic. A neighbor is an Hispanic like Rip. So I thought that's like LA is like, has its own kind of diversity. And so I thought that was like a real thing for a girl, that a guy who was a below the line Hispanic crew member for a movie would come and shoot in New Orleans because they have kind of the tax credits, and that would be the kind of woman who would adopt her. Yeah. And so it kind of just all felt right. And also the thing about Los Angeles is like I complain about it all the time, but I really have appreciated like the diversity, like even in my kid's public school, she's grown up with like mixed race and she's grown up with, same-sex couples, and that's just her life, and it's very natural to her and it's natural to her environment.
Let's also talk about recipes and food because that's such a big part of all of your books. I once went to Sajada Massey's house and she was actually trying out the recipe that was going to be in her book. And I know another author, I won't say who does not cook at all and just has like her sister-in-law do the recipes for her. So where are you on the scale? Are you Sujata or are you? Let me ask somebody.
I'm in between, and I've said this before, and I said at the last panel, another panel, that I really put recipes in because when I was writing, I was kind of reliving my time in New Orleans, and it made me really hungry. And I thought, well, my readers will. And I'm not a natural cook. I love to bake, but I'm always dieting, so I can never bake. And I've said that, like, good luck. Don't trust me 100% on those recipes. I mean, I didn't, but sometimes like the jambalaya, I love jambalaya and I really wanted to get it right. And I kept making the recipe and making it. And my daughter and my husband were like, please, no more jambalaya. We can't look at another pot of jambalaya. And I finally got it right. But with gumbo, I cheated.
How?
And I have a friend, Gaynell Bourgeois Moore. She actually, if you know the series, there's a Gaynell Bourgeois, and she really is. She's like in her mid-80s, and I met her when she was a tour guide at a plantation. And then we just hit it off, and we've been friends ever since. And I said, she's 100% Cajun. I said, Gaynell, would you give me your gumbo recipe? And she was like, oh, sure. And she sent it to me, and it's literally like having your grandmother tell you a recipe.
Pinch,
it's like,
right? A pinch of
yeah,
this.
you just throw this in and this in. And so I thought, oh my God, no one will ever be able to follow this recipe. So I kind of put like a little header on it, like this is, like told. It was almost like told. What is it they call it? Like told. I can't even think, like told tales, or when people are just extemporaneously sharing something. So I kind of put a little bit of disclaimer on it.
Do you get like a lot of, like, what kind of reader mail? Is it from recipes or what is
well,
it about
yeah.
characters?
Well, sometimes I get going, hey, you said to put a quarter something in your, a quarter condensed milk. Is that a quarter cup? Is it a quarter, can? I'm like, oh, I don't remember.
You're like, yes, just like say yes.
So I had to go back and figure out what I did. And that was a recipe I adapted from a 1930s candy cookbook, and I don't think they even said. So, and then I get like, I think maybe you're missing an ingredient, because what sometimes happens is that like you get edits, and so you do it, and I then kept redoing a recipe because it wasn't sweet enough for me, because I'm like a sugar person, and I just somehow missed an ingredient. So, sorry. And people would bring, this is in book, Body on the Bayou, it was the second book, and people would bring me to sign it, and I'd write it in. I'd find the page it was in, and I'd write in the ingredient.
We're going to do questions soon, but I have just a couple of quick fire fun questions. So what is your favorite celebrity encounter?
Favorite celebrity? I think Shirley MacLaine. I've actually encountered a lot of celebrities through my course of my career, but I think getting that mantra from Shirley MacLaine really rates right up there.
But also you worked with Martha Stewart.
Oh, Martha! I love Martha.
I love she forgot that.
I know, yeah. And I'm always like, now I claim that. I actually found a letter. Oh my gosh. I found a 1993 letter that Martha sent me. I guess I had told her, the last time I interviewed her for the My First Job column for Glamour. This was like, years, like 5 or 6 years after I'd worked with her. And then she would tell me what has happened to everyone. And then I found the letter where she congratulated me on getting a TV job. And she said, I'm going to be starting a show soon called Martha Stewart Living. Do you happen to know the production company? And I was like, I'd never heard of it. I was
Did
like,
you write
yeah,
her back?
good luck to you.
Were you guys pen pals?
I don't know. I guess I probably wrote back. I don't remember.
Do you think right now, if you guys were like on Instagram, you could DM her?
You know what? I've tried, and I haven't. Now she's got so many layers before her, but I know if I saw her, we'd, like Ellen, Martha, we'd hug it out.
What is your favorite place to write?
Is there a favorite place? My office. It's like I need like radio silence. I need cone of silence.
I hate music.
And no, I can't have any music, no sound. So our office is just a dump. Yeah. It just looks awful, but it's my safe space for writing.
All right, who's your favorite character to write that's not your main character? It could be in any of the series, any three.
Oh, I don't know. It varies with who I'm writing. I mean, I do love Grand Mère. I do have a lot of fun writing her. And I really like in the new series, I like writing Cookie because she's just kind of a balls-out character.
Who's Cookie?
Cookie Yonover. She's the recovering children's librarian who's now, and she's just kind of in your face, and she'll say stuff and she doesn't really care.
How do you come up with the characters like populate the books?
I don't know. I just kind of do. I don't have any. I just start thinking of. I don't know. I just do. I'm sorry, that's the worst answer ever. But I don't. And sometimes you think about like, a balance. Like, what do I need? What don't I have? Like, if you look at TV, there are some archetypal characters because you can break down the Friends cast. There's the dumb guy, the hot guy, the snarky guy. There's the neurotic girl. And by the way, they only discovered that in the second season for Courtney Cox. They didn't know how to make her funny in the first season. And if you look at there, I remember seeing one episode where she didn't have a line in a scene, and that never happens, and I knew what happened. The reason was whatever lines they gave her didn't work. They never found anything that worked, so they cut her lines, and they only went to her for reaction shots. Oh, wow. And then they discovered Courtney herself is very anal, and they wrote to that. So that's part of it is finding where people are funny and writing to that. Mm-hmm. So
you guys are going to do questions, but I want to just ask my own final question. Tell us what's next. I know you have a new book coming out. What, next week or 2 weeks from now?
Yes, and that is 4 Parties and a Funeral, and that's it's the 4th catering hall mystery, which I write as Maria DeRico, and it's really fun. It's a reality show. It's called The Dons of Ditmars Boulevard. Is shooting. They're shooting the pilot, and then there's also there's a wedding, so it goes back and forth between Queens and Connecticut, and all my relatives from Queens basically are going up to Connecticut, and they're not very comfortable there. They're wearing like Italian loafers on sailboats. So, and then they go to New Orleans. I get to send them to New Orleans for a bachelor and bachelorette party. So I really had a blast writing that.
Then you also, the second vintage cookbook just came out too.
That's right. Wined and Dined in New Orleans. And that was fun because I wrote a chase scene towards the end of it. Okay. So it was kind of like, I think a little of that was Knives Out. Because when I saw Ryan Johnson, I went to the Writers Guild has screenings, and he talked after the screenings of both movies, and he talked about how in Knives Out he wanted to, he talked about cozies and Agatha Christie, but he wanted to break with the form a little, and that's why there's that car chase scene in that movie. And so I kind of was inspired by that a little bit.
All right, time for your questions. I put on my glasses so I can see. Christina.
Hey, so you avoided the M word. How do you feel now about where you live?
So the question is that you avoided the M word. How do you feel now about where you live?
I love my neighborhood. I just love it, and it's beautiful. It's so weird to say that I feel a stronger connection to New York and New Orleans than the city where I've lived for 30 plus years, and I've made a pact with myself to really start at this late age, to really do more to experience and appreciate it, because it really is a fabulous place. Like ocean in a half hour, mountains in a half hour. It's an amazing place, and I need to appreciate it more.
Next question. I know someone has one.
Oh.
Yes, Amy.
You were saying you didn't know how you came up with characters, and I wondered if you were like being an observer of people.
Are you an observer of people? Oh, that was not done.
Create an amalgamation of all of those little things that you observed from people.
That's actually great. Yes, there are little things I'll take and then build on. And then also I'll actually look, like I realized I have a new series that will launch, the Golden Motels I was talking about earlier, and there's a character in there, and I was like, she's kind of dull. And so what is the comic angle to her? And so I really looked and found like this little fun comic angle to give to her. And basically, she's a terrible baker, but she lost her sense of taste and smell, and this was not COVID related. It actually happened to a friend of my mother's. And so I steal stuff, And in fact, my friend Charlotte, I have a friend from New Orleans, and her family has been there since like the 1700s. And she once told me a story about how one side of the family would swim across the river to court the other side. And of course, that ended up in plantation shutters. And she read the book. She goes, it's so funny. I read that story about my family. It was in your book.
How do you respond to that? You're like, gotta
go.
go.
Well, it just shows how much I love you, Charlotte, that I'm stealing from your life.
Another question? Anyone?
I think everyone wants to go to dinner.
You just said something that made me think of another question, actually, which is what's the oddest thing you've pulled from life to use in your story?
Ooh.
What's some of your
The oddest thing
I
you've
ever
pulled
pulled
from
from
your
life
life.
to use in a story. Oh, that's the kind of question I'm going to have the answer to at midnight tonight. So, I'd have to think. Let me think about it. Oh, damn! I wish I could answer that. It's such a good question. Why can't I answer it? I don't know. I think incorporating Gaynell was really fun because, I've told the story before how we lost touch. I met her in the early 80s, and then 10 years later, my husband and I went and we were visiting. We stopped at Homa's house because I wanted to go to the gift shop, and I happened to say to them, "Oh, I had a friend who worked up at Ashland Bell-Helene. Do you happen to know Gaynell Bourgeois Moore?" They go, "Know her," and I always have to do the accent. Well, it's not well, but I do it. Know her? She works here. And then she came bouncing down, and she's wearing one of those like ridiculous antebellum fake, they're all polyester dresses, and she comes bouncing down in her hoop skirt, and we reconnected. They actually used a walkie-talkie to call her. That's like, it was late 90s. So I think, incorporating her and kind of like that outfit into the books was the fun thing to do.
Another question, Glenn.
What's the origin story of Maria Dubika? Why write under a pseudonym?
My nonna came over. I'm first generation on my mom's side. She was born in Italy, and they brought her over when she was 3. And my nonna, I loved her. I had to ask her. She had saved like $800 for each of her grandchildren to use when they got married. And in the early 80s, I had to ask her for that money as key money to get an apartment in New York. And that inspired a play I wrote called So When You Get Married, about a nonna who, when the granddaughter asks her, refuses to leave the bathroom at an Italian wedding because she's so devastated. But my nonna was as cool as she could be about it while her heart was breaking inside. And she was just a character. Like, I'd stay out overnight, and one night she was like watching, Saturday Night Live. And I'm like, no, and she barely spoke, she always barely spoke English and barely wrote it. She once sent me a card and went to Elena, and we lived at 6 Torrance Place, Scarsdale, New York, and it went to 6 Torrance Place, Scardella, New York. But it got to us. And I said, "Nonna, you watch Saturday Night Live? Why?" She goes, "It's funny." And she was like, we asked her about her past, and she said they kept animals in the basement in Italy, and what the basement was, of course, is like the first floor. They call it the basement. It's like a lot of the older plantations, the first floor is where they kept animals. And we said, "Nonna, why did you keep them in the basement?" She goes, "Where are we going to keep them? In the kitchen?" So she had this great sense of humor. So it was kind of my, in a very tough life. So it was kind of my way of honoring her.
Any other questions? Yeah.
And you said that you don't know exactly where sometimes things come from. It reminds me of the story of Paul McCartney when he wrote Yesterday. He woke up in the morning and his book was on his head. And he was convinced that he must have heard it somewhere else and all around. And I'm just wondering, you ever have those kinds of strokes of genius where you just don't know where it came from, but it's just there for you?
Occasionally, like a character, I'll see a character that way. But what you remind me of, there's a story about Laurence Olivier where he was playing Hamlet or something on stage, and someone came up to him after and said, "Oh my God, that was brilliant." And he was like, it's terrible. And they were, "What's wrong?" He goes, "I don't know what I did." It just had this, like, for someone as structured as that kind of actor, to have that kind of loss of control was like panicking for him. So I do sometimes have those moments. I do.
One final question. Who wants to be the last person? Christina.
What's your favorite series?
Oh,
Ooh, pick your
that's
favorite
me.
baby.
Yeah, I honestly love. I love something about each of them. I mean, I just really feel like, when you invest in, I can't say I have a favorite. My favorite is whatever one is still available in the bookstore for you to buy. That's my favorite.
No, I heard, someone asked her earlier, and she said the last book that was out. I was like, well played, Ellen,
Yeah,
well played.
yes, the last book that was out. That's still available. But I think also just the fact I get to write them is so incredibly fabulous, and I just love creating these worlds that people want to visit and hang out in.
Ellen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I learned
Thank
so
you
much.
all. Thank you.